listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. Have you ever been called an extrovert or an introvert? What about an otrovert?
An otrovert is a person that is a non-belonger to a group, while introverts and extroverts relate to the group in different ways, but still relate to the group or the community. Otroverts are always facing elsewhere.
It's the personality trait that's been linked to being a non-conformist. So could you or someone you know be one? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Helen Smith. It's Friday the 8th of August.
Hey Tara, and to you listening, we're starting this morning in New South Wales, where Kathleen Folbigg's called for an inquiry into the $2 million sum she's set to be awarded by the government for her 20 years spent wrongfully in prison over the deaths of her 4 children. In 2003, Kathleen was convicted of murdering 3 of her children and for the manslaughter of her 4th, before a judicial review raised doubt over her guilt, finding the children may have died of an incredibly rare genetic condition, leading to her being freed in 2023.
I am so elated, it's not funny. I'm nervous and I'm everything.
Kathleen's conviction and time spent in prison has since been dubbed one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in Australian history, with Folbigg always maintaining her innocence. And since receiving news of the government's compensation offer, the 58-year-old's lawyer described it as a further insult, profoundly unfair and unjust, and that the system has failed Kathleen Folbigg once again. Now, given the time she spent behind bars, experts had estimated she might have received upwards of $10 million to cover her time lost in prison, the trauma, loss of income and reputational damage, with attention drawn to other wrongful conviction cases like that of Lindy Chamberlain, who spent just 3 years in prison after her infant was taken by a dingo, and she received $1.3 million back in early 1990s.
Now, many have come out in Folbigg's defence, including Greens MP Sue Higginson, who was one of the politicians who pushed for her release and said the $2 million sum would barely cover what Kathleen might have earned with a full-time job over the last 20 years. She says Premier Chris Minns had the power to correct the injustice and urged him to meet with Folbigg to right the wrong.
Israeli Prime Minister and accused war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel intends to take control of the entire Gaza Strip, as Gaza records its highest monthly figures of acute malnutrition in children, according to the World Health Organization.
Will Israel take control of all of Gaza?
We intend to, in order to assure our security, remove Hamas there, enable the population to be free of Gaza, and to pass it to civilian governance. That is not Hamas and not anyone advocating the destruction of Israel. That's what we want to do. We want to liberate ourselves and liberate the people of Gaza from the awful terror of Hamas.
And in that interview with Fox News, Netanyahu added, "We don't want to keep it, we just want to have a security perimeter, we don't want to govern it, and that Israel intends to hand it over to Arab forces to govern." Now, these comments were made right before a meeting of senior ministers to debate Israel's, quote, next steps in the Palestinian territory, with reports that Netanyahu is seeking approval from the Security Cabinet for military operations in these densely populated areas where displaced Palestinians are sheltering and where hostages kidnapped by Hamas in October are believed to be.
The United Nations has called such reports deeply alarming if they go ahead, with warnings of famine, as international outrage over the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza has continued to put pressure on Israel. PM Anthony Albanese just this week has confirmed he's considering recognising a Palestinian state in coming weeks without the approval of the US, after Donald Trump warned Australia not to do so yet. And the suggestion of full control would make Israel obliged by international law to provide security and ensure the basic needs of the population are met.
A coronial inquest will be held to look into the death of a 6-year-old girl who died of influenza earlier this week, just hours after being discharged from a New South Wales hospital 2 times. The The child was taken to the emergency ward of Sydney Children's Hospital on Monday, where doctors assessed her. However, she was later discharged before being brought back a short time later, diagnosed with influenza, then discharged again and sent away with at-home guidance.
The 6-year-old was then taken to the Northern Beaches Hospital where she died. In separate statements, a spokesperson from each hospital offered their condolences to the girl's family, with each now undertaking investigations into her care and a joint independent review being carried out. Now, just to point out, this second hospital where the child died, Northern Beaches Hospital, is actually the same one that a parliamentary inquiry has been announced for after a 2-year-old boy, Joe Massa, died after being triaged wrong and receiving care there last year.
Yeah, he was taken to the hospital by his parents after starting to vomit, and he was triaged as a lower priority patient despite having severe fluid loss and a high heart rate, and later dying of brain damage 3 hours after suffering a cardiac arrest. Now, that is not to suggest that the hospital in this instance with the young girl with influenza did anything wrong. That will obviously form part of the investigation, and hopefully these separate inquiries and inquests will find answers.
New research has found men out-earn women in 98% of occupations, and that female workers in Australia are typically paid 70 cents for every dollar earned by their male colleague after a decade in work. The Gender Economic Equality Study analysed 688 jobs in a bid to provide insights on how we can improve productivity and accelerate progress towards gender economic equality, which benefits us all.
And experts say gender occupational segregation is actually a handbrake on our economy, and that areas with a nationwide shortage of workers in key areas of the economy where the most gender segregated occupations are, such as in blue-collar construction and, quote, pink-collar nursing and aged care. And they're urging the government to step up as more gender-balanced occupations tended to have more equal pay. One of the biggest reasons behind the gender pay gap is apparently the motherhood penalty, according to experts, with Aussie women's earnings dropping by 55% in the 5 years after having their first child.
And this is partly because of mothers returning to part-time rather than full-time work and missing out on career acceleration and promotions during their time away, showing the gap improved slightly 10 years after giving birth. The report also found that even in heavily female-dominated industries like nursing, where women make up 90% of the workforce, female registered nurses were paid about $90,000 on average, or 21% less than the $114,000 typically paid to their male peers, and this is despite only working 10% fewer hours.
And in a move that will warm any animal enthusiast's heart, an Australian businessman has donated a whopping $100 million to a university vet school in WA in honour of his late wife, who was a huge animal lover. Bless. This donation is an unprecedented amount, and it's actually the largest donation ever made to an Aussie uni, Helen, with Perth's Murdoch Uni Vet School the lucky recipients.
Yeah, the kind businessman's name is Ted Powell, and he basically said, well, you just can't spend it all when you're 74, and that his wife just loved animals and was the most generous person ever. And he knew she'd be really proud of the donation. They also never had kids, so he thought this was a good cause.
Oh, agreed, Ted. Who doesn't love to see money donated toward anything that involves animals? And $100 million, like, oh my gosh, I wish I had that problem. But what's even better is apparently these funds, they're enough that the uni is actually going to be able to expand its vet student numbers by as much as 50%, as well as redevelop the whole vet school and give it a brand new facility, which is just epic. So go, Ted.
Yeah, that's awesome news. Now, that brings our headlines to a close for today. Up next is my deep dive looking into otroverts. Not extroverts, not introverts, but it's a completely different personality trait. So stick around if you want to find out if you might be one. Have you ever thought you don't belong within the walls of society and what we've been culturally conditioned to fit into? Well, you might be an otrovert. The personality trait can be described as someone who isn't communal and doesn't feel a sense of belonging or alliance to any group, but can still be popular and well-liked. Dr Rami Kaminski is a psychiatrist who's been studying this personality style for over 30 years and is an otrovert himself, publishing his research in The Gift of Not Belonging. So, could you be one? Dr Kaminski, what is an otrovert?
An otrovert is a person that is a non-belonger to a group. So, in other words, while introverts and extroverts relate to the group in different ways, but still relate to the group or the community, otroverts are always facing elsewhere. And so they're unable to relate to the group at all.
You've been studying this personality style for over 30 years. Why did you choose to study what an otrovert is?
Very simple, because I'm one, and so is my son. So it's a very long road, a very long journey. I can summarize it along two lines. One is the fact that when I was growing up, I had this sense of otherness. Even though I was, shall I say, I was very cool and nice and was no problem, and I was very well received and popular. But I always felt as an outsider. You see, belonging is a feeling. It's not something physical. And you can be inside the group and not belong, and you can be outside the group and belong. The sense of belonging is something that is imbued in everyone, ever, in all the cultural situations throughout history, everywhere, including me, my children. We are all being culturally conditioned. There are so many groups that you can belong to, except for otroverts who can never share their identity with a group. And that is basically the difference between otroverts and other people. And that's why it's so interesting, because while we all undergo this conditioning, it's impossible to be emancipated at the age of 3. However, you really need to have people that don't undergo this kind of conditioning, that are social, outgoing, connected to other people, but they don't have a group identity. And that is always fascinating to me, at least when I was growing up.
So does an otrovert want to belong?
Yes, of course. I mean, do you think that, I mean, of course you don't think at the age of 3 I had some philosophical stance or, I said, no, I don't want to be a conformist. Of course not. I mean, I wanted to be like everyone else. And it's primarily and especially painful during the time where communality, where the group is the most important in your life, which is adolescence. And it's not surprising that adolescence is where most otroverts walk out very bruised. Because you see, let's say you're not a popular person, and maybe you're very sad and angry and people are trying to help you, whatever it is. But they know that you don't belong because nobody wants you there. But imagine everything is internal. It's not really outside. So that's why being an otrovert is something that is so mysterious. And trying to explain what an otrovert is to someone who bought into the communal conditioning is very difficult, much like you try to explain the absence of anything, except for one thing, and that is what changed my mind, is I realized that there are other people like me. And I wouldn't have realized it, had I not become a psychiatrist.
I want to go back to your book because you talk about some of the core qualities of what an otrovert is. What are they?
It's basically, if you think about any activity that doesn't have to do with the group. So for instance, otroverts are not interested in popular culture. It's not interesting. It's something that is really very much hive mind. Otroverts don't have FOMO because you don't feel, even as a teenager, you don't feel that you're missing out. You know you're not missing out. has nothing to do with being introvert or extrovert. It has to do with the fact that whatever is communal activity, holidays, religion, nationality, anything that is made by consensus that doesn't really exist. I mean, there's no such place as the United States. We made the borders. Obviously, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as religion. Your listeners, forgive me, but somebody has to teach you. So you live your life basically, and I know it's a cliche, but you live your life in a way that you think for yourself.
So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of being an otrovert?
Well, disadvantage is that you're always a little bit off. I describe it as I happen also to be a left-handed. So, it's like being left-handed in a right-handed world. It's only 10% of us who are left-handed. And frankly, it's not the end of the world, But it does. There are certain things that really make difference for me. And other people don't even notice. But if I wanted to do something that only a right-handed person can do, I cannot think of it, I would not be able to do it. For instance, otroverts are not team players, Otroverts like to think alone. And that has been very helpful throughout history with people that saw things that other people don't see. Or rather, see things that to me are obvious and other people don't see as obvious, let's say. And so you can be very innovative. You can be a wonderful artist. You can be a wonderful author, a teacher. You can do a lot, a physician. So the corporate world, for instance, is terrible for otroverts. Any aspect of that, and I've been there. Politics is terrible for otroverts because of the idea that, you have to understand the group. I don't understand the group, in that way. I only can understand you. Because when I see anybody, otroverts see people as themselves. So you can have very, very interesting and deep relationship, even in a very just haphazard kind of situation. And of course, those that you do have deep relation, like for instance, my wife, this is really a beautiful relationship that have never been codependent. We don't need each other. We constantly choose to be with each other because we're both otroverts. And so we know how to live alone together.
Can you talk me through some of the case studies that you unpack in your book? What was one of the most surprising things that you found?
The only thing that has been surprising, and still is the fact that there are so many people that once they learn about it, it takes them hours to have an awakening that is very, very interesting. And that is something I didn't expect. And the first patient that I mentioned, my first patient, otrovert patient as a psychiatrist, was this young boy that really what he had was otherness or introversion. But because he was different in a way that nobody understood, he was called, at that time, schizophrenic patients, sometimes they say other things about someone who doesn't belong. Not belonging is considered to be something bad, The reason I called my book The Gift of Not Belonging is because we constantly are trying to force all of us and everyone around us to belong. It's a very interesting life, and it's different because the whole world is based on belonging and joining, but belonging is even one step further. And if you're not one of that, it's your life is different, even though it doesn't really seem different from the outside, but you feel it different, and you know that it's different, and it's different because you do not have a communal identity.
Are there any examples of famous otroverts? Would an otrovert be someone that is ever in the spotlight or a celebrity?
First of all, I know some celebrities who are otroverts because of my work. but of course I cannot identify them. But you look at people like Nietzsche or Kafka or David Bowie, Kurt Cobain. There are people that have been otroverts, and actually all of them deal very poorly with fame. Fame is very bad for otroverts. For me to even though as you can tell, I like to talk about it and I have no problem talking about it, but I wouldn't have done it had it not been for the idea that I very much want people to know about, not trying to convince anyone, but people to know about it.
So if someone is listening to this and they think they might be an otrovert or they might know someone who is an otrovert, what should they do?
Well, they can go, as the simplest thing is to go to the Otherness Institute website. There is the questionnaire that we have devised also for a long time. And you can find out 3 things, whether you are a community or communal introvert, communal extrovert, or an otrovert. And I think it's very well delineated. We did it with some, biostatisticians. But I think that we can offer some balance for individualism as opposed to the authoritarian people that are now pulling the world into group think. And that could be a help, a gift of non-belongers, not of being non-belongers, but a gift of non-belongers to the world.
Dr. K, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you very much, Helen. It's been a pleasure.
That was Dr. Rami Kaminski, and his book is called The Gift of Not Belonging, and I'll pop the link to the test in our show notes. Thanks for listening. That's it for now. We'd love it if you could share this app with someone else you think might enjoy it or might be an otrovert themselves. It's a really easy way you can support everything we do here at The Briefing. And you can check us out on Instagram. at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.
Listener.